Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today we are continuing our Final Fantasy talk, talking about Final Fantasy XIII, 1, 2, and 3. Tyler, take it away.
Oh my gosh, there were so many Final Fantasy XIIIs, which didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, considering they weren't very well received. Well, the first one was kind of not very well received by the community, although it did get a lot of good reviews, and it sold really well, so maybe the vocal minority is just wrong. Maybe it is actually a good game. But everybody I talk to when we go through all of our lists of Final Fantasies, I'm like, hey, you know what? One of my favorites is, top 3, Final Fantasy XIII. And they're like, oh, that game is terrible. And then I'm like, did you play it? And they're like, no, I heard it was terrible. Like,
do they throw tomatoes at you?
Yeah, I have a lot of tomatoes now. I don't even like tomatoes. I don't put them on my sandwiches, but I've got a bunch of them. So
they just throw them at you, you catch them, and you're like, ooh, fresh tomato. Oh,
yeah, it's very nice. Joke's on them. They're going to keep me alive.
I'm eating so healthy.
I make a wonderful tomato sauce.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry to have that reaction to spaghetti sauce, everybody. That's my natural gut reaction. Oh, someone says spaghetti sauce? Oh, yeah.
So we're coming to the end of the main series of Final Fantasy. I'm only going to talk about the 13 series today. We will probably get into 14 at some point and 15. They're still new enough that I'm not really considering them as part of history. If you are curious about 14, though, check out No Clips documentary on Final Fantasy XIV. They have, I think it's a 3-part documentary series that talks about the rise and the fall and the rise again. Well, I guess there wasn't an initial rise, really just the fall and then the rise. And it's really good. It's a really well done series. And I don't want to attempt to replicate it in podcast form. So we're going to skip that one.
Yeah, I watched it. It is fantastic. Double seal of approval. Tyler and Mike. Both of us. That's right.
Danny O'Dwyer. Danny O'Dwyer? That's what it is. Forget what his name is. But he does a great job. Okay, so Final Fantasy XIII. It's an interesting turning point in the series, I think, because it was the first foray onto the 7th generation of consoles. So that's the PS3, Xbox 360, that generation of consoles. And it took nearly 4 years to release after Final Fantasy XII.
Yikes, that's a long time.
Yeah, 12 did it sooner. This game also solidified the series ditching the turn-based combat forever, but still kind of holds true. There's it uses a sort of active time battle system. We'll get into it, but it's definitely much more real-time feeling than previous entries in the series. And so they didn't go back to that with 13, which signaled to fans like, hey, we're going to do some weird stuff with our combat systems from here on out. And they do continue to do weird stuff with their combat systems. So we talked about how it's like one of the worst received Final Fantasy games to date. I think the Metacritic score says like 93, but if you were around on the internet in the gaming scene at the time this game came out, you'd have thought that Tetsuya Nomura had personally gone into these people's homes and used the toilet without flushing. And I admit, yeah, that which is if you've never had that happen to you, it's a terrible thing to have happen to you.
It's horrible.
Yeah. So it's also one of the few Final Fantasy games that got a direct sequel. In fact, it got 2 direct sequels, and those games are much better than the original. So let's talk about the origins. Final Fantasy XIII has the distinction of being one of the longest Final Fantasy games to develop of its time. Development started all the way back in 2004, and it was planned that it would be on the 6th generation of consoles, a PS2 game. This changed in May 2005 when Sony showed the Final Fantasy VII tech demo Square had made to show off the capabilities of the PlayStation 3. And when players went nuts for that, and it still looks good today, you should go check it out, Sony decided to move production from the PS2 to the PS3 and then use Square's new multi-platform engine called Crystal Tools to do it. They knew that developing a brand new engine would slow down development, but they figured they'd make up time on the back end with other games being able to use the tech much quicker. This ended up being true, but to an even larger extent than originally planned. Other Square games that wanted to use the Crystal Tools engine actually began bogging down development a little bit with their needs, which kind of slowed the process down. So it was like this weird, it's going to make it so easy to make new games, but then all these new games are like, and we need all these features, which slowed down development of the engine. I just think that's kind of funny.
That is weird, too, from a business standpoint.
Yeah.
We need to get this big moneymaker out. But these other ones need other stuff. Oh, okay. Well, I guess we're just splitting up and using a lot of time.
Yeah, well, it happens. And what they made ended up being a pretty decent engine. I think they made all 3 Final Fantasy 13 games, and they made Final Fantasy 15 all with that same engine. And they were originally going to use that engine for Kingdom Hearts 3, but they switched to Unreal kind of at the last not the last minute, but they switched to it in the development process.
You know what would be an interesting thing? And when I say thing, I mean podcast, because that's what we're doing. I think talking about engines, like game engines, and how they've progressed over the years. Because you say engine now like it's no big deal, and I'm sure people get into video games and they just talk about the game engine. But when I was playing games when I was a kid, like you don't even think about that at all.
No,
you don't know anything about it. Yeah,
I think that like consumers, the end players of games, sort of like put a lot of stock into like, well, what engine are they using? They should have made a new engine. They should have done this with the engine, and it's like that's like an engineering question that they make. It's not one that you can just like armchair sit back and be like, they should have used a new engine. You know what I mean? Like it's like when you criticize the quarterback on Monday morning.
Oh, yeah. It's totally just the backseat game developer mindset that everyone, like the backseat director at a movie or whatever, like, oh, that script was terrible. It's like, oh, really? You write scripts? You work as a screenwriter? Oh, because I thought you worked at an insurance company. Bill.
And if you're an insurance company.
I just pulled a guy named Bill out of my... If there's a listener named Bill and you work at an insurance company, it's not you. I'm so sorry.
But you're also probably unqualified to write movie scripts based only on that information. If you have written great movie scripts, then that qualifies you.
Yeah, maybe Bill's a secret screenwriter at night. He lives a double life and we don't even know about it. Well, in that case, good for you, Bill. I'm sorry for insulting you.
All right, back to Final Fantasy XIII.
Sorry.
It was first shown to the public at E3 2006, nearly 4 years before it would be released, which is kind of typical Square fashion, announcing things way before they're released. The Final Fantasy VII remake trailer shown at E3 2015. We're still waiting for that one, although it's coming out in March. I'm super excited. Okay,
but just for PlayStation.
But just for PlayStation. Well, we'll see how that goes. Maybe just for PlayStation at first.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those slow burn things, and they're going to release it on everything else later.
Yeah. They announced it at the same time as two other titles, Final Fantasy Versus 13, which is a more real-time kind of Kingdom Hearts-esque take on a Final Fantasy story, and Final Fantasy Agito 13 or Agito 13, I don't know how to say that exactly, which was a portable game designed for the PSP. This was all sort of in an attempt to recreate what they'd done with the compilation of Final Fantasy VII a few years earlier. All together, all of these games, Final Fantasy 13, Versus 13, and Agito 13, were all to make up this new series for Final Fantasy called the Fabula Nova Crystallis.
Ooh, fancy name.
Yeah. You may notice that those other two games never came out. Well, after a few years and the less than stellar reception that the first game got, Final Fantasy Versus 13 sort of fell off the radar for a few years before re-emerging as Final Fantasy 15. We'll get to that someday. Agito 13. Yeah.
So it just became the full Final Fantasy 15 as we know it?
Yeah, I think they kind of wanted to decouple themselves from Final Fantasy 13 after it was like not super well received. So they were just like, you know what, maybe we won't call this 13 and we'll release it as the next Final Fantasy because we still think it's a cool game.
Cool. I like that.
Yeah. Agito 13 was transformed into Final Fantasy Type 0, a side story focusing on school kids who all have names taken from a deck of cards. We'll talk about that one when we talk about side stories and spin-offs of Final Fantasy, which is not today.
No, not today.
Nope.
We got so much 13 to talk about.
That's right. Finally, in December 2009, Final Fantasy XIII was released to Japanese players and was received pretty well. It sold nearly 1 million copies on its first day in Japan and ended the year selling almost 2 million copies just in Japan. Yeah. That's pretty great for just a Japanese launch.
Would you say that's hotcakes?
I would say it's similar to gangbusters, yes.
Okay, good. Wow. We got to use the scientific terms here.
Right. So like hotcakes and gangbusters. So, outside of Japan, it launched in March 2010. So that was like a worldwide launch in both America, Europe, and all the places that it launched in. It sold a combined 1.3 million copies by April, so within a month. I say combined because this game wasn't only released on the PlayStation 3. Nope. After a decade of PlayStation exclusivity, except for a few PC releases here and there, the Final Fantasy series launched on the Xbox 360. And this is all because of that Crystal Tools engine we were talking about. They made it multi-platform from the start, which allowed them to release all of the Final Fantasy games on multiple platforms. And from here on out, I have a feeling that's kind of the way it's going to go, especially if Final Fantasy VII is using Unreal Engine, which I haven't confirmed this, but I'm pretty sure that's the engine they're using, which is another very portable engine. So I would be surprised if it doesn't show up on Xbox.
How sad is Sony, you think? They lost that exclusivity.
Yeah, they were probably pretty sad.
I mean, it's not like they don't have a bazillion exclusive titles that are really good already, though. So
yeah, that's true. I remember there was some controversy around this game launching on 360 because there were PlayStation owners who felt they'd been cheated out of an exclusive. They were like, "This is BS. This game shouldn't be on Xbox 360. We only want it on PlayStation," which is like a weird thing to me to like get mad at other people because they can also play a game that you can play. Like, great, everybody can play the game. Why? How does this hurt you? I don't understand.
Yeah, they wanted to be in like a special club for Final Fantasy. Is that what's going on?
Yeah. I guess they thought that like taking time to put it on 360 would hurt the game overall. I don't know. Gamers are weird. It's not like they made it exclusive.
No.
It was even better on the PS3, actually. It ran at a little bit of a higher resolution. The cutscenes, like the full motion video sequences, were higher quality too, since there was like way more space on Blu-rays than even on the 3 DVDs that the game shipped on for Xbox. That's right. So if you bought it on PlayStation, just 1 Blu-ray. If you bought it on Xbox, it was 3 DVDs, and even that is not even half of what a Blu-ray can hold. So
isn't it weird? And this is definitely a concept for another day, but I want to touch on it real quick. That Xbox 360 technologically less advanced than the PlayStation 3. And now I feel like to make up for it, Microsoft's like, we got to be better than the PlayStation. Like, we're better than the PlayStation 4. We're better than the PS Plus. Like, we got to like be better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or at least try to match it, you know?
Yeah, I think the pendulum swings back and forth every generation. It's like whichever one is winning sort of rests on their laurels and the other one has to improve to make it. And so I think next generation we'll see the PlayStation like really come out swinging and the Xbox feel like the one that's sort of getting complacent.
Oh yeah, really nuts.
We'll see. So Final Fantasy XIII did pretty well on launch, and it got a lot of favorable reviews from critics. They loved the graphics and the battle system, but they really didn't like the game's linear structure, both for progressing through the story and for progression as a character. Fans were pretty torn on it. I have a theory that when it comes to Final Fantasy games, and I think this also applies to Zelda games, except with the exception of Breath of the Wild, I think fans love what they love for a lot of reasons. Everyone has their own reasons for loving a game or a series of games, and they get attached to the pieces of that game that they love. So much so that when new games in the series come out that inevitably change some of the things that these players love, they get a bit defensive and dismissive towards the new thing. It happens all the time with Final Fantasy games. When they first come out, they generally get decent reviews because they're high production value and there's a lot of money that goes into them. But the quote-unquote true fans will all have issues with the game. They will hate it. They'll say it's the worst one ever. And then after a few years, folks start to look back fondly on those games, but only through the lens of nostalgia. That and each new entry sort of brings new fans to the series. So once it's been a few years, those fans have nostalgia for the game that previous true fans had issues with. Zelda had the same issue. Remember when Wind Waker came out and everybody said it was awful, it was just going to be the worst thing ever and nobody wanted to play it? Then it was it was like a few years later, people were like, oh, hey, Wind Waker, that was a pretty good game. Twilight Princess had the same thing. Majora's Mask had the same thing. I was even one of those people that didn't like Majora's Mask. And then like 10 years after it came out, I went back to it and I was like, this is a really cool game. Skyward Sword is the same way, although I think we're still in the period of time where people don't like Skyward Sword. So we'll see how that one goes. I think, like I said, Breath of the Wild is an obvious exception. Everybody loves that game. It's universally just awesome. And Ocarina of Time was kind of the same way back in the N64 days. But anyway, that's my theory on long-running series and why the most recent one tends to be like just hated and then looked back on fondly years later.
Yeah, it's really like that. Breath of the Wild is the exception because I feel like Ocarina of Time was so beloved because that was still in the era where video games were like, wow, like they weren't super mainstream yet.
Yeah.
You know? And now that we're in this mainstream age where everyone's super judgmental and negative, and I'm thinking of like clickbaity YouTube stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's what I'm thinking about. So I'm like, oh, that's what's annoying, you know?
Yeah. And there are exceptions and anomalies too. Like I'd say that God of War is a pretty long-running series, but the latest God of War, despite being way different from all the old God of Wars, like people just universally loved it. So there are exceptions here and there, but I think that's kind of a rule you can follow when it comes to series.
Yeah, definitely. Good theory. I stand by it.
Thanks. So the story of Final Fantasy XIII, and I might get some of this wrong because it's like a weird and complex story like all Final Fantasies, but the story is set in 2 locations. A ball city thing floating in the sky called Cocoon that floats above a planet called Pulse. The rulers of this world live in Cocoon, and they banish anybody who has come in contact with Pulse down to Pulse. So at the start of the story, we follow Lightning, who is sort of described as like a female Cloud Strife. She's like very edgy and like too cool for school and has...
That's how I describe you.
Yeah, thank you. And she
too
has...
edgy and cool for school.
She has asymmetrical outfits. That's everything Tetsuya Nomura designs. The outfits are all asymmetrical. But we follow her as she attempts to save her sister, Sarah, from being purged. I said that with quotes. It's just the act of sending anybody who has come in contact with Pulse back down to Pulse. So we also meet Snow here. He's the leader of a resistance group called Nora, and he's attempting to save the folks being purged. There's a guy named Saz there too, and he and Lightning derail the train and shenanigans ensue. They all end up being branded as what's called Pulse L'Cie, and they're enemies of the state, enemies of Cocoon. And they're eventually going to turn into monsters unless they can complete a task unknown to them called a focus. So the story follows this group and a few other characters in their journey to complete their focus, and of course, they got to fight some sort of god by the end to save everybody because this is a Final Fantasy game.
Final Fantasy.
Yep.
I realized, by the way, when I said you were too cool for school and edgy, I said too edgy and cool for school. So I think I reversed it, but it still works. Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that. I'm definitely okay with being too edgy.
Also, Tyler, if you guys don't know, because you never see him, he's always just a voice. He's always wearing asymmetrical outfits.
It's true. I get all of my outfits designed by Tetsuya Nomura.
He'll walk in and he'll have just like a normal T-shirt on the left, and on the right he'll have like a spike pauldron that just comes out.
Yeah, and it's all being held together with belts.
Oh, totally.
Several
so
belts.
Many belts.
Way too many belts.
At least 30 belts on Tyler. I always say that. Old 30 belt Tyler walking in to this diner.
That's what they call me at the diner.
Totally.
Yep. All right, let's talk about the battle system here. I love the battle system in Final Fantasy XIII. So 13 goes back to having separate battle sequences from the overworld. Remember in 12, you just saw things on the field and you fought them right away. You didn't like transition to a sort of battle screen.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah. The battles are random, like they were in 10, but the enemies are on the map, so you can see them, and then when you run into them, you get taken to the other battle screen. So it's like take some of the good stuff of 12 and then also some of the good stuff from other games too. The combat is a real-time system with an ATB, an active time battle gauge, but it's much, much faster paced than the older games in a way that makes it feel completely different. So each character has an ATB bar that fills up, some characters have more segments on it than others. As the bar fills up, you're able to execute actions based on how many segments of the bar are full, anywhere from like 1 segment actions, and then the full bar, I think by the end of the game, gets to be like 5 or 6 segments long. So based on how much of that bar is full, you can execute different actions. More powerful skills take more ATB segments. And the player can pick which abilities to use, but because the game's so fast, there's an option for auto battle, which will pick an optimal use of your ATB segments automatically. This kind of seems like the game is playing itself, and I think a lot of people who just looked at the battle system looked at that and thought, what am I even doing here? The game is just playing itself. Because it's called auto battle. It just looks like it's playing itself. I think this feature is super important because the actual game was in spending time with the paradigm system. So forget your individual moves. That stuff gets taken care of by the computer. It's about you. It's on you to design a strategy for the computer to execute the tactics on is sort of how I played this game.
Yeah.
So like in Final Fantasies of yore, there are jobs. I don't think they're called jobs in Final Fantasy XIII, but they're basically jobs. So there's 6 jobs in the game. Ravager, Commando, Medic, Synergist, Saboteur, and Sentinel. And these sort of roughly map to other jobs in the Final Fantasy series, like traditional jobs, but not perfectly. So each character can be any of these jobs, though some are better suited for some jobs than others. Before battles, you build what's called a paradigm deck, where you put together combinations of these jobs for the folks you're battling with. And then, so you can have like 6 different preset configurations, I think, to take into battle with you. Once you're in battle, you can change your paradigm setup anytime you want. So you're constantly switching the jobs of every person in your party at the same time. So the game is less about picking your individual abilities and more about picking the right paradigm for the moment. and you switch them a lot, like probably every 5 to 10 seconds. If you're in a particularly heated battle, you'll be changing paradigms a lot. The player also only controls one character, so the other two members of the party get controlled by the computer anyway, so you need sort of a strategy for them to follow too. Oh, man.
This sounds really
fun.
cool. So is it, this is gonna, I mean, I'm only relating this to the games of today, you know. This seems kind of auto chessy. You're setting things up.
A little bit, yeah.
Autoplay?
There's a little bit of that going on in here, although it would be as if your chess pieces were fighting all the time and you were constantly pulling some out and putting more on the board. Ooh.
I like that.
This is an idea for an auto chess game. File that one away. Let's make an auto chess game.
I mean, you heard it. I'm going to censor that so no one heard it.
Yeah, so we don't give away our intellectual property.
That's right.
So enemies have 2 bars. They have a standard health bar and they have a stagger bar. Once you've filled the stagger bar, then the enemy starts to take a ton of damage for a small period of time while they're staggered. Different kinds of abilities affect different enemies differently, so figuring out the opponent and knowing what types of abilities to use to build the stagger bar up and keep it up is really fun. So the breakdown is basically that you're constantly switching paradigms to more effectively build the stagger meter, and then once you've got the stagger meter filled up, you're switching to your paradigms that just deal tons of damage. It's super fun, and I love it.
I like that idea a lot. So that stagger is kind of their weakness, and then you just knock their health down a ton when you figure out their weakness.
Exactly. And so it's all about finding that weakness and then exploiting it, and it's super
just
fun.
Like real life fighting.
That's right. Find your character's weaknesses and exploit them.
And also using a gigantic sword, probably.
Yep. If you don't have a gigantic sword in your real life combat, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, that's
why you're losing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they have gigantic swords in Final Fantasy XIII?
They have gunblades, like from 8.
Oh, nice. Now you're speaking my language. Here we go. Squall's back in it.
That's right. It's a little bit more of it's kind of a more sci-fi than fantasy feeling. So a lot of the weapons are like Saz has guns. I think Snow uses his fists. They all have like a sort of type of weapon they use. Hope uses a boomerang thing.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's fun. They all use weird things.
Not really often used in video games. It should be used more. You heard it here first, folks. I want to see more boomerangs in video games. I want a Call of Duty where you use a boomerang.
I agree. I bet if Call of Duty put a boomerang in their game, that would be the next thing. Like, remember when like one game, I don't know which one did it, but there was one game that put a bow and arrow in their game, and for like 5 years after that, every game had a bow and arrow in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It might have been Tomb Raider.
Yeah, Tomb Raider. I think
early
Crisis
Tomb Raider
2
remake.
maybe had a bow in it, or Crisis 3 had a bow.
Yeah. It's good stuff, though.
There was some game that did that.
Jaybird Championship Series, boomerangs. That's what we're trying to say.
Yeah. Jaybird Boomerang Series. All right. Character progression in Final Fantasy XIII. It's where the game falls apart a little bit. So the Crystarium is a place you can go to level up each job for each character, but there isn't really a whole lot of choice happening there. So you spend your Christogen points earned through battle on moving through the Crystarium that feels at first like Final Fantasy X in the sphere grid, but it actually doesn't really offer you any choices. Occasionally you can like branch off to grab a stat boost or something, but for the most part, you're not really making any meaningful choices. That, and you're limited on how far you can get in the Crystarium based on where you are in the story, which limits grinding, which I sort of appreciate, but it also makes it feel stifling and limiting. Like if you want to grind, it won't let you, which is kind of a bummer. So
interesting. They won't let you grind.
Yeah.
Seems like the
at least not until you
to
get
Final
towards the end of
Fantasy
the game. Yeah. Towards the end of the game, it starts to open up a bit more. The world opens up and you start to be able to grind, but the Crystarium never opens up, which is really a bummer. So, yeah. The game doesn't take place really on an open world map like other Final Fantasy games. It really is kind of, you just run straight from one end to the other of every map, pretty much through. It's like very beautiful, but it's definitely feels like a bit of a roller coaster. This one is a point of contention amongst fans because the game feels like really focused and limited because of this. There's no like towns to go to or anything like that. I think there's an argument to be made that it allows the story to move quickly and at a good pace, but I admit it. I missed the open world portion of other Final Fantasy games. Final Fantasy X has a similar issue, although you get an airship pretty early on in that game, which makes it feel a little bit more open.
Are you ready for a Mike Coletta hot take?
Yeah, Mike Coletta hot take. Go.
I think there's too much open world in video games right now.
I agree.
Open
world is not a plus by default. It can be a cool thing in a cool game. It can be a bad thing in a bad game.
I'm just thinking about all of the like I'm gonna call it out. Here comes another call out. Ready?
Yeah.
Ubisoft. Like every one of their games now is designed like Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
Where it's like open world, you climb a tower or do a thing, see more of the world. And it just doesn't do it for me anymore. You know,
I get
sometimes
that.
you want that linear thing. We're going to talk about linear stuff when I was doing the What You've Been Playing this week. Ooh, tease.
Ooh, all
A hot
right.
take
Can't
to a
wait to hear
tease.
about it.
It's professional
All right.
podcasting.
That's right. So despite all of these shortcomings, Final Fantasy XIII sold very well, and while it had mixed reviews amongst fans, there were definitely a lot of folks who love it, myself included. So it came out on the PS3 and the Xbox 360, but it did also get a Steam release in 2014 and a weird like cloud streaming based release on Japan in iOS. So it's like streams to your phone. It's very weird. Normally, I'd say the PC release is the best way to play a game, but this one feels a little bit janky and bare bones. I think the best way to play Final Fantasy XIII and all of its sequels as well is to buy an Xbox 360 copy and play it on your Xbox One, where it's Xbox One X enhanced, so it's all 4K.
Whoa.
It looks great. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So the game sold well enough to get greenlit for a sequel. This would be the fourth time up to this point that a Final Fantasy game gets a direct sequel. Final Fantasy X had X-2, 12 had Revenant Wings on the DS, which we'll eventually cover in the side games thing, and Final Fantasy IV had a sequel released in 2008 called The After Years. So this was the fourth sequel. Final Fantasy XIII-2.
Ooh.
I love this game. I also like this game. It's better than 13. So while 13 had many flaws as a JRPG, Square decided to give it another go with Final Fantasy XIII-2, a game that follows Lightning's sister, Sarah, and a new character named Noel as they battle across the world and across time to figure out what happened to Lightning at the end of 13 and probably fight a god and stuff again. So development only took a year and a half on this title, which is a testament to the Crystal Tools engine that Square developed for 13 and how it allowed Square to make games really quickly once they finished 13, they could crank out the games real quick. So 13.2 came out fast, 13.3 came out fast, and then 15 they took their time with, and that's good. So 13.2 has the same battle system as before, but expands upon it. So in 13, you spend a lot of time with a bunch of different party members, depending on where you are in the story, and you don't have a whole lot of control over who's in your party. In 13.2, you always have Sarah and Noel in your party. But your third person is a monster that's with you, and it so has like a little Pokemon element to it where you can catch monsters, and each monster has just one job, and so you fill out when you're building your paradigm decks, you put in different monsters depending on what jobs you're looking for. So
I'm sold. I'm 100% sold.
So you got to capture
Pokemon-like system? Oh.
It's great. And every Pokemon has its own like Crystarium. So the Crystarium is like greatly expanded upon in this game too. There's like choices to make it feels a bit more like the Sphere Grid. And so Noel and Sarah each have Crystariums for each of their jobs, and then each monster has one Crystarium based on whatever their job is. So you can level up your monsters too, which is very fun. The enemies, again, are directly on the map, but this time you can attack them first to get a preemptive attack, which makes the rest of the fight much easier if you land that first attack. So, main points of criticism from the first game have been addressed here. Levels are non-linear and open. Progression through them has a bunch of choice. Same with character progression. Most areas can actually be accessed at different time periods, like 2 or 3 different time periods. So they'll be like very different depending on the area that you're in and what's changed over time. So that's kind of a cool thing and a cool way of replaying areas in a different light when you see them in the future or in the past or whatever. So
that is great. That's a great idea.
Yeah, this game was pretty well received. I think it suffered from being a sequel to 13 because people didn't really like 13 and they weren't about to come back for 13-2, which was a bummer because this game is really what 13 should have been. Like everything about it is improved. It's so much more fun. I think the story is good. I sort of like the story in 13 a little bit better, but 13-2 has a pretty cool story too. So
yeah, it's an interesting marketing choice to make it so you have, Final Fantasy 13 did well critically, but then we got torn apart by some really hardcore fans that were really loudmouths, and it kind of made us bad. So we're going to call it 13-2. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, it's just interesting they went with that. I mean, it seems like it didn't suffer, though. Like, it's still a good game, you know?
Yeah, and the first one sold well enough that making a sequel was justified in that sense, and I think the second one sold pretty well, too. Best way to play it, again, Xbox One on backward compatibility.
That's really cool that Xbox One is getting some love for the Final Fantasy finally.
Yeah, they just put the backward compatibility stuff out at the end of 2018. So I need to buy. I think I'm going to go online and see if I can buy just all 3 of those games for Xbox. I think they're pretty cheap now, just to have them because that's the best way to play them.
You know, I might do that myself. Man, that's might get me back into Final Fantasy. I'm looking for a new game. Oh, man.
Ooh.
Oh, it's exciting. Exciting times
13's
right now.
good. And while you're playing 13, if you like it, just get hyped for 13 too because it's better in every way.
Also, while I'm playing 13, I'm going to be on the phone with you the whole time. Ready
Yes,
to talk
please.
for 80 hours?
Probably took 40 or 50 hours for me to beat it my first playthrough.
That's not bad.
No. It's standard Final Fantasy length.
Would you say standard Final Fantasies 40 to 50 hours?
Yeah, I would say 40 to 50.
Not like Persona style where you're in that for like 80.
Yeah, I think I spent 90 on Persona 5, and that's considered like, wow, you really speed ran that game.
Dude, apparently that new Fire Emblem that I'm looking, like, it's looking pretty nice. You know, it's on Switch. It's got some Persona style elements to it, like where you're a teacher.
Oh,
It looks kind of cool.
Yeah, I've been looking at that and being like, oh, man, that's something I should pick up. But I have too many games to play.
So many games to play.
We got one more game to cover here in our remaining time. There was another sequel to 13. This one is called Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII. So maybe you're right, and putting the game out as 13-2 was like not the right thing to do because anybody who didn't play 13 because they heard bad stuff about it just skipped 13-2. So they changed the name of 13-3 to Lightning Returns.
I like that. Lightning Returns, colon, Final Fantasy 13. So you're leading with the Lightning Returns. Gives me tingles.
Yeah.
It's all that lightning.
And how it's returning.
It's coming back. All sparkly.
Yeah. So this one's also based on the Crystal Tools engine and released on PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and later the PC. But this time we're controlling only lightning. No parties, no other playable characters, just lightning. And they decided to change nearly everything about the game. So the battle system, the progression system, even the structure of the narrative changes pretty dramatically. So I'll move quickly to this one because we're starting to run out of time. But that was kind of a theme for the whole game, actually running out of time. We're starting to run out of time here a bit, so let's move fast. It's like how the rest of the game feels. So Lightning Return follows Lightning after the events of 13-2, 500 years after the events of 13-2. She's woken herself up 13 days from the end of the world and has been chosen by the god Bunavelza to save the world from impending doom. And this game isn't kidding about that time limit. Time moves forward in this game, and the player has like some sort of limited control over like slowing it down and stuff. But you're given 13 in-game days to finish the game, and if you don't, it's game over. It's kind of stressful, and I don't like it because of that.
Oh, it's like permadeathy in a way?
A little bit, yeah. If you make it all the way to the end of day 13 without beating it, it never happened to me. It's actually 13 days is way more time than you need to finish this game. It's like kind of weird that they put a time limit on it, but then gave you so much time that it didn't matter. I think what they were going for is they wanted you to feel a sense of urgency while you were playing because the story has that sense of urgency, but make sure you actually had enough time so that you could finish the game. So I guess it worked, but it didn't mean I was enjoying myself as much as I could have been if I felt like I could do like side quests and stuff, because it felt like side quests would come up and you'd have to be like, oh, is this worth it? It's going to slow me down. Is it going to get me something good that's going to make this game easier? I guess that's probably what they were going for, but it didn't feel like fun decisions. It just felt like stressful decisions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't want to feel like I'm on the clock the whole time.
Yeah. So, but it was cool. It was okay. But the battle system, they changed it up big time. They called it Style Change ATB, and it's very different. So the player still has an ATB meter that charges, and you're still trying to stagger the enemies. Like a lot of the concepts are the same, but because Lightning is the only playable character, you have to constantly be switching jobs for her to make sure the enemies stay staggered and able to take tons of damage. So she's constantly changing. The classes that you change from are like you get them from the outfits that you're wearing, similar to 10-2. So she's like constantly changing in the middle of battle, like changing her outfit, which is cool. They're all the outfits look really cool. So like being able to see them all is really neat. But the gameplay itself is like you have like heavy attacks, light attacks, magic attacks, and you sort of have to use them in a way that lets you stagger the enemy. It feels a bit like Dark Souls actually, because there's a lot of reaction time of having to like watch for the enemy doing a thing, so that you can like block it or something like that. So it was a cool battle system. I'm not sure I ever got the hang of it by the end of the game, but I did finish the game, so I must have known how to use it. But I definitely didn't play it on like hard mode or anything like that.
Yeah, I feel like that's what you want in a game, to feel like you've kind of mastered it by the end. Like those Batman games are really good. It making me feel like I'd like mastered being Batman. And I'm talking about like Arkham Knight.
Yeah,
and,
that's a great game.
Yeah, like that's those. Like it just made me feel in the end like, oh, I'm Batman.
Yeah. So yeah, there isn't a whole lot more to say about this game. I liked it, but it definitely felt rushed by the time limit system they put in the game, which made me feel like I was rushed the whole time. So like I said, I think that was kind of what they were going for, but I'm not necessarily sure that makes a game fun, you know? So it's like, congratulations on achieving your goal, but I don't think it made a fun game. I remember being relieved when I finally finished it, but now looking back on it, I've looked back on it with a little bit of like nostalgia, I guess. I don't know. I liked it overall. Like years later, I'm like, yeah, that was a cool game. But I think at the time I was relieved for it to be over.
You're like, oh yeah, I did it, and I saved the world in under 13 days.
Yeah. So those are the three main games of the Fabula Nova Crystallis series of Final Fantasy games. Technically, Final Fantasy XV is also part of this series, but they sort of, once they realized that this whole like grouping games into series, like mini series like that, wasn't really a great idea and didn't really work out how they wanted it to. They didn't really play on that too much when Final Fantasy 15 came out, so there really isn't anything linking 15 and 13. Just that they're like, I guess maybe sort of in the same like world, but not. I don't know. They're just part of the same series, even though they're not really related. I don't know. I think the series is interesting because it showed the power of Square's new development process at the time. So I think the Crystal Tools engine is pretty outdated now, and Square's moved away from it in favor of Unreal Engine for things like Kingdom Hearts, and I'm pretty sure Final Fantasy VII is Unreal as well. But the Crystal Tools gambit really paid off in a way that allowed Square to make 2 sequels really quickly for the 13 series, and I think that's pretty neat. So they were probably cheap games to make, and I think in 13-2 and Lightning Return still sold decently well. They didn't sell as well as 13 did, but they also cost way less to make, so they didn't have to sell as well. You know what I mean?
I feel like if you put Final Fantasy on any game, it's going to sell well.
Yeah, you know? Especially if you can put together a game for relatively cheap because of the way you structured your development for the first game. Like, great. That's just a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I'm making an arcade game. It's called Final Fantasy Big Chocobo Hunter, and you hunt Chocobo in the Big Buck Hunter HD style. It'll sell like gangbusters, hotcakes, bananas. Yeah. Give me all your quarters.
That's all I got for you on Final Fantasy 13. We're getting close to modern times in terms of Final Fantasy, so it still remains to be seen kind of what the legacy of these games are. But I like Lightning, and I kind of liked all those characters, so I'd be happy to see them come back. I'm also happy to leave them in their trilogy and just go back and replay them with fond memories years later. I'm cool with that too. So with that, Mike, what you been playing?
Okay, well, first I want to say, Tyler, I feel like an expert in Final Fantasy right now for only playing one half of one game. So thank you. 2, I beat Inside. The game.
You did it.
I mean, oh man. Hey, Mike, good job on beating a less than 2-hour game. Yeah, thanks, me. I did it. It was actually really fun. I think I actually am looking right now for more indie titles like this. I mean, I don't even know if you'd even consider Inside indie anymore, because they made Limbo and that was huge, and then this was their follow-up. But these like shorter, they don't even have to be puzzle platformer games, but just shorter games that I can play and beat in like 3 or 4 hours. I really like this, you know, because I get closure, and for a busy schedule, not to brag, no, but like because I have like. I mean, podcasts and shows and stuff going on. It's nice for me to like have these games that I can just sit down and beat and be like, okay, that was the perfect amount of this style game. Like I felt like I got my puzzle platforming itch perfectly. after beating Inside. And it ended really cool. It was really weird. I got all the secrets. I followed I found like one of them naturally. And then I used a YouTube video to find the other ones. But 1,000 out of 1,000 achievements the game. I feel like I beat it. I found the secret ending. Like, it was really cool. Like, I really enjoy this game. I recommend Inside to anyone. It's free on Xbox Game Pass right now, and it's 2 hours long, and you won't regret it. And it's a little weird at times, but in a good way. And it's got some really cool, fun mechanics to it. But I beat that, and then I've been playing a lot of Apex Legends with friends. But to take a break, my friends and I have started playing another free Game Pass game, Worms WMD. You remember the Worms games?
I do remember the Worms games.
Oh my goodness. So fond, such fond memories using the holy hand grenade against my friends in Worms.
Oh, that's a series we could do podcast episodes on.
Oh, for sure. I would love to do it. I'm going to play more Worms WMD, and I'm going to beat the single player, and then I'll probably do a podcast on the Worms series because this is just so fun. Like, you just jump online at night, and you lose and you don't care because it's just so funny, and you all are like missing shots. You know, we're all making grenade throws that just would never work, but we're trying it anyway. And we're also all kind of learning and figuring out the game at the same time. We do like 4 players in each game, all against each other, free for all. And it's just so much fun. And so, yeah, Worms WMD, really into that. Free Xbox Live Ultimate Game Pass or whatever. That Game Pass, it's paying for itself right now. It's doing great stuff. I can't stress it enough. I would be totally fine, I think, just doing a subscription model. I'm obviously buying Borderlands 3 when it comes out, and I'll buy Destiny Shadowkeep. But it's also kind of nice to take a break from Destiny. Even though there's a big event going on right now, I don't really care.
Yeah, so, I'm the same way right now when it comes to Destiny. Like, I want to play enough to get my t-shirt, and I think I can still do that. But in terms of grinding out that armor, I remember the grind from last year. And while I don't want to say it wasn't worth it last year, it definitely was a real grind that I'm not sure I'm down for again this year.
Yeah, and that armor, the big thing about it is it's your first piece of armor, 2.0 armor, but then everyone's making the great point that in October now, when Shadowkeep launches, it's not going to matter. You're not going to use it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you will because it'll be a Armor 2.0, but like, I guess it depends on how the changes that they're making for Armor 2.0, if that ends up meaning that like I can use kind of the same armor for a long time or not. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, it's been really good. It's been a good week for video games. Full disclosure, we will be recording right after this because I'm going to be in the Grand Canyon next week on a vacation. So just letting everyone know that now. So if you got any, as always though, if you got questions or emails or anything you want to send to us, you can do codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can find Tyler on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter. But before I keep doing the ending, I'm going to ask Tyler what he's been playing. What have you been playing?
I have been putting all my time into Final Fantasy XIV new expansion pack Shadowbringers.
Shadowbringers.
I'm fully hooked again on Final Fantasy XIV. I love it. I just finished the story last night, and it's lengthy. It's probably standard Final Fantasy story length, and I think of similar Final Fantasy quality too. I think it's the best story that has been told, certainly in the 14 world, which isn't. That doesn't mean nothing because like the other stories are pretty good too for the most part. But I really liked it. You play. You have to be the Warrior of Darkness now because the game revolves around going to this like this other world that is shrouded in light. Like it's just daytime all the time, and it has been for decades, and people haven't seen the night sky in so long. And so your job is to, as the Warrior of Darkness, is to bring darkness back to this world, which is I think an interesting sort of twist because usually darkness is bad and you're bringing the light somewhere.
Oh wow, yeah, you're the darkness. What does he say? You're you're not the Prince of Darkness. That's Ozzy Osbourne. What are you called?
The Warrior of Darkness.
The Warrior of Darkness. That's cool though, man.
Which is
I like that.
Normally you're the Warrior of Light in these games. I always call you the Warrior of Light, so it's like a nice little reversal, but it doesn't mean you're the bad guy. It just means you're doing something different for this world. Yeah, it's fun. Like I said, the story is good. I think the MMO-ness of it like sort of gets in the way. You can tell there's a lot of padding. Like the story will be moving along great. You're like, twists and turns. This is really cool. And they'll be like, oh, cool. Let's go to this new area. And you're like, all right, great. Can't wait to go to this new area. And then you get there and it's like, before we do anything in this new area, we need to get the locals to trust us, or some variation of that. And it's like, why don't you go do chores for them? And so you have to talk to like 3 or 4 people in each new area, and they'll be like, well, go out to the forest and get me some bear butts, and maybe I'll trust you. And it's like, okay, the story was moving really nice, and then you made me stop for like 5 hours to do a bunch of errands. Don't you know I'm the warrior of darkness? Don't you know what I've done in this world? It's like in Destiny when you're like grinding for like weapon parts or whatever, and it's like, don't you know we killed Callus, we killed Riven, like we're way cooler than this.
Yeah, we're all really cool. And what's crazy is millions of us have done it. It's so crazy.
Yeah. So the story is good, except for those things really kind of break it up. And like there were parts where I was skipping cutscenes because I knew they weren't relevant to the overall story. They were just like giving me sort of like probably backstory that like a lore nerd would care about, but I don't. So I still really enjoyed it, even after all that. And I'm getting ready to get my item level up so that I can do the new raid. I got to do it on normal mode, and then I'm going to do it on hard mode. I'm really excited for it. But that's it. That's all I've been playing. Now that I have finished the story, I'm going to go back and play, or I'm going to go back to World of Final Fantasy. I really want to finish that game. I think I can spend less time on Final Fantasy XIV now that I've finished the story. So that's my plan.
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking that. Dude, I'm glad you're having fun.
Yeah.
When you find an MMO that you're into, it's pretty cool. That period of just being so into it. Destiny's the same way. It's like, oh, man, when I just that feeling of any game, really, I guess.
Yeah.
Just now with MMOs, it's like you got all those people around you, so you don't get bored. You got people to talk to.
That's right.
Well, that's awesome. Oh, I forgot to mention, we did get a rating, so we're up to 28 ratings now. Thank you so much, whoever gave us that rating.
Thanks.
You mean the world to us, you know? Tyler was just talking about you before the podcast. He's like, oh, man, that anonymous person means the world to me.
Yeah.
That's what he said. But yeah, you can give us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, or we're on Spotify if you want to listen to us there. Just tell your friends. Tell your friends about us. That means the world to all of us, you know, if friends are involved. And then next week, we're going to do a little something special for next week while I'm gone. There will be an episode, but we're going to try something a little different. And I hope you'll all stick around and buckle up and join us and let us know what you think about that too. We really want to know. And with that, thank you so much for listening. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.